but they basically just wear whatever scrap they can find, and at the same time their outfits do not change at all, and simultaneously it is not codified, except, as I said, the big codes between the chief of the tribe and perhaps the priestess or whatever, that shamanic crazy stuff, that whole schizophrenic in there, by the manner in which to bring up their children, which is rather awful, really. Absolutely horrid. Because they're all mental and to do all the crazy magical nonsense. And also to have war paint, but it is not codified like even it was in antiquity, whereby if you are in the army in that position you wear this, if you are in the army in that position you wear that, if you are a priest in that position you wear this, if you are a Jewish priest you wear that, if you are a Jewish priest who is of another Judaism you wear that, if you are a pagan priest or if you are a pagan follower like me you wear something else. It was not like that, it was not that complex, obviously. And as time progressed, things became more complex. Everything, more positions began to be created. Suddenly there was an entire priesthood, a pagan priesthood before Hebraic religions began appearing in 4000 BC in what is now Palestine and so on. But still, it was organized, although it was pagan, it was organized, and so they began to have codified systems of clothing. But still, it was not fashion, for it barely changed from century to century, and clothing was rarely seen. So at first we go from a stage of purely practicalism, which still codifies, well, at first, when everyone was still in Africa, before 50,000 years ago, it was really just practicality. As time progressed, it began to have different positions. There began to be a chief of a tribe. So, apart from those many essentials, basically, his whole clothing would have been, as regards practicality, the reason for which it would have been invented, but still it would have integrated, look, I'm wearing these crazy feathers, which are not practical, just to show that I'm this chief, or look, I'm wearing these crazy feathers, just to show that I'm going to war, to rape children, or whatever. And then it moves into, as antiquity starts appealing, and we can see that by these tribes that still exist. There's a tribe in Afghanistan, or I forgot where, the Nuristani people, not Nuristani, I forgot the name, and something like Scandinavia, and they still live like what would be comparable to the 5th century Gothic tribes in Great Britain. So obviously their clothing is much more complex than the Stone Age, but still it is still mostly just practicality. But it obviously has different codes, though, way more different codes, not just for the chief of the tribe. For the tribes consist of much more complexity. It is a more complex tribe. It is basically the pre-antiquity tribe, basically pre-Roman style tribes, just before people became more modern. And also the Romans and all were the most modern back then, so these tribes were actually more common than the Romans. And also it's to have a codified for virgin girls, married girls, old women, widows. They start having all these codes. Perhaps if somebody just died of very close, but they might wear something darker for a short period of while, at least the direct tenant or whatever of the wife. Perhaps there's like a chief and a right-hand chief. They began having patterns and all. It began to be more complex as it really moves to the antiquity, which also has all these complex rules. But still, clothing was essentially, by 90% of it at least, just a practicality. Basically, it is super hot, like in Dubai. You wear something that insulates you, or people with dark hair who could not live, so they were practically wearing nothing. But you still have some cloth to at least wrap your sweat off. If it is very hard, you wear a little bit of something. If it is medium, you wear a normal amount of something. If it is cold, it's wearing more, until we get to the Inuits, who basically wear the skin off a seal in very extreme cold weather, at least as extreme as it could be compared with our people dying in an ancient day when they did not have heaters and all. So So it became, but it was essentially just practicality. And one can see, I mean, that even there it is a representation, a fake one obviously because it was actually dark skin and negroid, but of Charlemagne. And although it is, yeah, but that's later on. I mean, fashion in the Western world, and not just what you would call the Western, I mean, in all of at least Central Asia and all of Europe, including all these Eastern European countries, which are not necessarily considered Western, Scandinavia, Siberia, whatever, Ukraine, and all those. Fashion began much later on, but it happened as I explained it. So basically, people were rallying to things like, now what differentiates really between what we call Western, or at least European fashion, and the rest of the world, at least the traditional clothing before they started modernizing. For those who have not modernized yet, well, it is really that not wearing dresses, at least men were not wearing dresses. If you look at the Arab world here today in 2023, that's a whole bunch of Emiratis driving Ferraris and with smartphones and all the technology one could dream of, and yet are wearing a dress at the station, which is rather a dress for men. But the European man, he is not wearing it. This is what we are known as. We are not wearing. We have a short coat and trousers, which really differentiates us from most of the rest of the world. In Japanese, the traditional Japanese dress, traditional Chinese dress, even the traditional Eastern European dresses in many instances. But very when that development happened, was it always there? Not at all. It began happening in the Middle Ages, but until very recently, until so now, first of all, why were people around the world, very recently for most of them, and for the Western Europeans until about the year 1000 after Christ, why were they wearing dresses? Because it was more practical, because basically the idea was, at least in Europe, from what I understand, from what I know, because I also know a lot about the past, how people lived, their mentality, and how what technologies they had available, how was their daily lives, and where the daily lives. So washing garments, I mean, the past was incredibly dirty, and people literally had flies on them. I mean, like fleas. They had to take out. They would every 2 weeks. It would be a communal activity to take out one's fleas between one another. They would pick on one's fleas and lice, because it was so dirty. And not just that, I mean, when you live in the countryside, there are insects, and without modern pesticides and all, they're gone, whether you have that dirt or not. So trying to keep clean and all was extremely difficult, and so really for most people who were peasants, and which we, by our standards of living today, we would consider extremely poor. Although they were not, I do not consider them, most of them, extremely poor, because to me, somebody extremely poor is somebody dying of hunger and thirst. And obviously, if they were all dying of hunger and thirst, how would we be here? So they were not extremely poor, but as per our standards of living, we would consider them what they had available, and no running water, sleeping next to animals and next to poo and urine, being covered in that and whatever, we would consider them extremely poor. So, even if they had plenty to eat, even for those that had plenty to eat. So, trying to keep clean, basically what they did until very recently, until about the 18th century in Europe, or at least in the Western world, even in much later on for other places like the Eastern European countries, farmers, most people were peasants or tribesmen. For the peasants, for the tribesmen, they were nomads. They would steal, or they would hunt animals, like the white people. They were not big into farm in Europe until at least the year 1000, 1200. They were tribes back then. There was still a lot in Central Asia, or they were invading Europe and pillaging or hunting animals, whatever. And so obviously they would basically, actually trousers were known as barbaric wear. Barbarians used to wear trousers, like this representation of a Viking. In truth, a Viking was black and negroid because it was a Dane, not a Germanic. So this is fake, but who cares? The outfit is rather accurate,